Today for a throwback, we're looking at an Alphasonik amplifier. Let's go back to May of 1985 with the audio annual car stereo guide. You can see the AS1100, $250 back then, which equates to $710 in 2023. That's a lot of money for a 100-watt amp. We also can look at the Crutchfield from winter-spring of 1986. We'll see the Alphasonik AS1100 for $199. They also had a 1060 model for $119. Now, we got this one off eBay a few years ago, and it was supposed to be brand new. So let's open it up and see what it's all about. Here you can see we have the warranty card, Berkeley, California is where Alphasonik was at the time. Also, we have the instruction manual. I will have that scanned and have a link in the video description if you're interested in seeing this. I know some people have these old amps and don't have the manuals. I myself love to see these manuals. We'll get to the specifications a little bit later. You can see them here, but we'll talk about them in just a little bit. Let's see what else is in the box. We have the Molex plug, which includes the speaker outputs as well as high-level inputs, which we will not be using. Obviously, you can't use the high level and the low level at the same time. Here are some of the little mounting ears for the amplifier to help mount it down. And lastly, here is the amplifier. And here you can see there's some controls on the front. We're going to talk about those next. But yeah, here we go. Center frequency from 30 Hertz to 100 Hertz. Also 0 to 12 dB for the level. That's an EQ. Also, we have a volume for the bass, which is also the gain. Gain is never the volume. Then we have an on-off button that you just push. On the back, we have RCA inputs as well as bypass and high-pass outputs. So it's very nice to be able to hook up additional amps if you need to. Molex plug as well as the power and ground are coming directly out of the amp. And again, here's a Molex plug connector that has the speaker connector as well as the high-level inputs. Here's everything that came in the box. Looks pretty good overall. Those who were paying close attention noticed the box said AS1100 and the amp said MAS-1100. And that's because these are from different eras, and unfortunately whoever got my amp swapped it out, so it's not truly an AS1100, it's the MAS. It's rated 100 watts into 4 or 2 ohms between 11 and 16 volts. Frequency response 15 to 160 hertz. Has a subsonic 12 dB at 15 hertz, 24 dB per octave crossover to 160 hertz, and the EQ again between 30 and 100. The boost is variable between 0 and 12 dB. Here we have the very old school, sometime in the 80s, Alphasonik Monoblock amplifier, 100 watt monoblock. Got it all hooked up, and we're going to go ahead and do the little thing we always do to charge the caps, which is use a test light. And all we do is hook up the positive, and then before we hook up the negative, we hook it to the test light, and then we'll actually go in here. It's not a very good sign because we didn't get a light, or it came on and went off really quick. So the power supply is on at 13 volts. So we'll go ahead and hook it up, and then we'll push the power button and see if we get smoke or if it actually works. If it works, we'll test it on the dyno. We have this old Alphasonik monoblock hooked up, and we're going to power it up for the first time. This thing was brand new, came out of the box. I'm not sure if it's going to smoke or not. I've got my protective goggles on. Okay. It's making some noise. Let's turn that off. And let's find out if it's just pulling excessive current. We'll put the clamp on it. Sounded like it may have been because let's see what it's doing. Oh yeah. There's your Class A, pulling 50 amps of current at idle. Yeah, I think that's probably not a good thing.
Several bad puns later.
Here we have another box. This one's kind of heavy. What's inside? Let's find out. Here's the Alphasonik before we even open up the box. Again, here's the parts. A lot of electrolytic capacitors. Looks like there's also a transistor there that was replaced. A couple of them. So again, I love when the technicians do this, kind of show you what they've done. Let's get inside this amp. This is AS1100 tested. That was my note. And let's see what it looks like in here. Here's the Alphasonik MAS-1100. Frequency control here, level control, volume, power off and on. Looks kind of like a EQ booster. It does have inputs and outputs on the back, so you can send your low-level signal to a different amp. And it has the power ground and remote, and also has the little plug there for the speaker output. So yeah, I'm excited to try this one out and see. I think it's rated 100 watts, mono only. For the late 80s, that was kind of weird to have monoblock amps. They really didn't have that many. I had a few amps repaired by Dale P. He's here in North Carolina. Did a great job. So let's take this amplifier, fire up the good old SMD DeMoore Engineering Amplifier Dyno so we can test the power output. First up, we're going to try 8 ohms mono. It's not rated for 8 ohms, but we figure we try it anyway. 40 hertz tone. Certified test takes us up to 1% distortion. And we get 58 watts at 14.22. Now let's drop the voltage a little bit because I know you guys are going to be asking, hey, what about lower voltage? Well, this amp is highly regulated. And as you'll see here, even just a little over 12 volts, we're going to get virtually the same power. 59 watts at 12.45. So not a whole lot of difference there. I will show that for each test. So if you want to see the 4 ohm and 2 ohm test, just stick around. We'll show that. Uncertified up to clipping. Virtually the same, 60 watts, 14.16. Again, it's not rated at 8 ohms, but we're just doing this just for fun. Dynamic test sends a pulse track, again, 60 watts. So 60 watts across the board at 8 ohms, 40 hertz for pretty much every test. Now let's try 4 ohms. It's rated 100 watts at 4 or 2 ohms. 14 volt test first, certified to 1% distortion. And yeah, we get our 100 watts, 108 at 14 volts. Now we'll drop the voltage down to around 12.5 and try this test again. 40 hertz to 1% distortion at 4 ohms. And yeah, 107 watts at 12.28. I'm going to run a test now with the microphone close to the amp so you can get an idea of what the amp is struggling like doing these tests. This is going to be a 4 ohm certified test. So here we go. All right, sure you probably heard that. I got 108 watts at 12.26 volts. Now, wasn't that some interesting extras? Let's try the uncertified run at 4 ohms, 14-ish volts. Again, not too much excitement here because we're going to get about the same. 109 right at 14 volts. Let's send that pulse track, dynamic track into the amp, and you can see this regulated circuitry definitely keeps it from doing a whole lot of extra power. 110 at 13.93. Now let's try 2 ohms against rated 100 watts. Probably will do more. Let's find out. Certified test to 1% distortion at 14 volts. Can we get 100 watts? Oh yeah, 144 at 13.9. Big power. Actually, not big power. It's just a lot bigger than it was. Now, we tried to run the uncertified test, and what's wrong here? So this Alphasonik amp, you can see the light is on, but this one has fuses on the speaker side. So I think our last test, we actually popped this fuse. I will power the amp down and take it out, and we'll see. And yes, if you can see there, we have definitely popped that fuse. Got to figure out what size it is and replace it. Here you can see the break on the inside of this bus style fuse. So we swapped it out, and let's run the test again. I actually ran the certified test again, not really sure why, but virtually the same. 143 at 13.93. We got 144 before, so literally 1 watt difference. Let's turn the voltage down though and try it around 12.5 volts at 2 ohms and see if we can get close to that 144. And pretty close, 139 at 12.17. Next up, we'll run the uncertified test of clipping at the higher voltage around 14. See what we get here. 146, 13.88. We will do the dynamic track lastly here and see. A little bit more power here, 167 at 14.03 volts. Now we'll take off the bottom, or actually the top of the amp in this case, take a look at the internals. Now this was done prior to the repairs, so what you're going to see here is some of the old components that are in here that were actually swapped out by Dale when he did the repair. There you can see a lot of wires crammed in, definitely mid-80s to late 80s Alphasonic design. 50 volt, 100 microfarad Samyang capacitors here in this amp, and 3300 microfarad 35 volts also. You can see there, pretty impressive looking guts from an old school amp. Now these subwoofer boxes were on sale. If you keep up with my YouTube channel, you'll see that I listed these in my community tab. These were actually $16 for these 10-inch speaker cabinets that are sealed up. So I got a few of them, and today with this amp we decided we're going to use an old school Solobaric sub by Kicker, just so that we can kind of show off the amplifier with something that's kind of in the same range. Even though this speaker is several years newer than the amp, still we figured we'd try it out. This is the Solobaric S10C from the close to the mid-90s, I think, maybe 94 or so, but maybe 95. You guys will correct me in below, I'm sure. But as you can see, I checked the ohm on this and it was 107 ohms, so something was wrong with this driver. So I actually had to swap it out to the S10D that I had, and this one actually measured out right around 3.5 ohms. So it looks like the other one might be bad, unfortunately. But yeah, let's get this set up, get the Alphasonic amp plugged in and wired up to this Kicker Solobaric sub, and we'll actually have the SMD meter as well, so we can see how much true power we're putting out to the subwoofer. Let's kick it. So we have the Alphasonik MAS-1100 hooked up to this old school Kicker Solobaric S10D subwoofer, and we're going to try it out and see what kind of power we're pushing to the sub and how much before the amp clips. For some reason this old speaker has got a ton of rise. You will see this. This is a 40 hertz tone. Crank it up. Sounds bad about right there, but there you go. There's the old school Kicker woofer flex. 21 watts. 13.7 ohms. Let's try the woofer test. So you may or may not notice, but the sound quality is not that great. I initially thought it was the Kicker subwoofer, but I hooked up a different subwoofer and one that I know that sounds good, and it still didn't sound really good. So there's something up with the amp. I'm not sure if the dyno test kind of hurt the amp a little bit or something, but either way, it doesn't work extremely good, not as good as it probably should, so there's something probably still wrong with it. But anyway, it was fun to do the amp dyno test and find out how much power this amp could put out. So appreciate you guys watching as always. Make sure you stick around for more Wilson Audio Extras. Big D, I'm out.